Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. A very warm welcome on a very wet day into St Helens Parish Church, right at the heart of the town. Firstly, a huge vote of thanks to Peter for his organ playing and the very moving story he just relayed to us. If you haven't been already, the Alzheimer's stall is at the back of the church here, and it's very appropriate with the story he gave because today is World Alzheimer's Day. And one plea I've had today from the two ladies I've spoken with is for our GP colleagues to prescribe to them directly referrals where people in the early stages of dementia for both patients and carers, and there's a lot they can do where often they receive them at the crisis point. So plead to my GP colleagues to bear that in mind. They've had no referrals at all, they were telling me, so that's what I've learned today, so we can make a practical step on. Well, thank you for coming today, and in great numbers too. My job is to open the AGM, which is wrapped around the public engagement event. And thanks also to all the people who've manned their stalls today with such enthusiasm. For me, particularly, being in this church strikes a bell because at that font 61.5 years ago, I was actually christened. So this is literally coming home. And I'm a St Helens boy, and I don't have the accent, but I was born in St Helens. I'm a Cowley boy as well. And at Cowley, it was pressed upon us when I was at school, our motto was non sibi sed omnibus, which for those who need the translation is, not for self, but for others. And it was drummed into us as boys. What we had to do all our lives was to put something back in the community. I had the privilege of chairing and leading the CCG, along with Sarah, who's our chief exec, and my GP and professional colleagues on the board. And we all share a passion about the borough, making it the best it can be. And that's too across our partners, the local authority, fire, ambulance, police, third sector and housing. We are absolutely passionate about getting the most out of the St Helens pound. So that's why we do what we do. I do it because I could do other things. I do it because I really care about the borough, about my own health, about your health, and about getting the best we can for the borough. And the St Helens CCG has faced, without doubt, challenging times and continues, like the rest of the NHS, to face that challenge. But what we have is determination to do the best we can on behalf of you, the public. Now, we need your help as well, because the NHS, along with every public sector and the voluntary service, is stretched. And today is about showing you the alternatives there can be sometimes, rather than necessarily going to A&E or going to see a GP or even the pharmacist. It's about getting the right care at the right place at the right time. That's where we need your help as well in making sure we get the best value out of every pound. So I hope you find the AGM of interest to you. We had some questions already, and there'll be a chance for those later on. But thank you for coming, and thank you for your enthusiasm and taking part. Please don't leave, because before the end today, we've got Bernie Whelan, who'll be leading us in some singing. And Sarah and I saw her at the town hall earlier in the year, and she is one act, I will tell you that. And you won't leave without those endorphins really tingling as she encourages you all to take part. So I'm going to hand over now to Mike, my colleague, Dr. Mike Agenese.
Thank you, Geoffrey, and welcome everybody. Again, it's quite commendable that you've all taken time this wet afternoon to attend the AGM. My name's Mike Agenese. I'm a GP in St Helens. I work at Central Surgery, which is one of the surgeries at Low House Healthcare Resource Centre. I'm also on the governing body. I'm one of 4 GPs on the governing body, where I serve as the deputy chair and the deputy clinical lead. You might ask, what do GPs, what are they doing on CCGs? Well, I think the idea is that we are in constant contact with public and patients on a daily basis, and we can bring their perspectives, of course, as well as lay members, to the commissioning decisions we make at the CCG. So today, I'd just like to emphasize or talk you through some of the challenges that the system faces, and particularly primary care. As you know, 90% of contacts with the NHS by members of the public occur in primary care. Today, the average member of public sees their GP or contacts the primary care team 6 times a year, and it's worth reflecting that that's twice the rate that it was 10 years ago. GPs are seeing more patients and carrying out more face-to-face consultations on a daily basis, and there's been actually also an exponential growth in the number of contacts by telephone. So people are working very hard, yet it seems, or it's starting to appear that patient satisfaction with the access to services, particularly in primary care, is deteriorating, albeit from a very high starting point. Sort of, relatively speaking, satisfaction is still quite high, but there is evidence that people are starting to feel that they can actually get in to see their GPs when they need to. So today I'd just like to talk you through some of the challenges we face and look at some of the factors that may be driving that challenge. Research has actually looked at this and sort of come up with 3 possible factors. So there are patient factors, there are factors that are actually generated by the system, and finally there's also the challenge we face around workforce and recruitment. Patient factors, I was speaking to someone in one of the health stores earlier saying, sort of they've seen so much more activity because people are probably a little bit more health anxious than they might have been in past, because information is freely available, but not always the right kind of information. I think there's a sense that people are less confident about managing their own health concerns. As a population, we're all getting older, we're all living longer, and with longevity comes an accumulation of complex long-term medical conditions. And it's just not one, but by the time we get to 85, we're probably carrying 3 or more long-term conditions. And what's happened here locally is that our growth in over 85, so between the age of 65 and 85, is actually growing quite rapidly compared to other parts of the country. With the sort of complexities come complex drugs, which require a little bit more time to actually monitor. System factors, we all want to be cared closer to where we live, so that sort of there are a lot more conditions that have been discharged out into the community, and over the last 10 years, 10, 15 years, you've probably seen conditions that would traditionally have been managed in places like the hospital being managed in primary care. So that actually puts pressure on the time that's available to actually deal with patient contacts. Adding to that number the fact that actually most people that are contacting their primary care services actually want to be dealt with on the day. So there's a pressure to actually protect appointments, to actually deal with that, so people don't end up going off to A&E where it becomes a different kind of problem in itself. So when you keep things back so you can deal with the immediate response, inevitably you've got less time for those who want to come in and have their diabetes or their complications of cancer treatment actually followed up in their GP surgeries. There are much more than ever. The drugs that we prescribe are much more complex, so they need more follow-up, they need more blood tests, they need regular, monitoring to make sure that people don't develop complications from them. In addition to that, so we're getting this increasing sort of complexity of conditions that we have to deal with, yet the workforce is shrinking. So like the population, the workforce in the primary care is actually aging. So not just with doctors, but with practice nurses. If you look at the demographics of your local GPs, you'll find that over 25% are over the age of 50, or between the age of 50 and 65. And that's actually a very accurate predictor of retirement intentions in the next 5 to 10 years. Added to that, younger GPs are choosing not to actually necessarily come into general practice as partners, as used to be the case a few years back. They're choosing either to remain salaried or to, even more so now, work as freelance GPs. So that is actually putting added pressure on the system. So we've got a picture of escalating workload and a shrinking workforce. If we carry on like we are, there's no way the primary care, which is actually the bedrock of the NHS, can survive. And with that, the NHS in itself will really struggle. So we really have to think of how we do things in a different way. So if I could just turn to some solutions then. The stalls all around today have actually advertising, sort of the kind of wealth of resources that are available in the community. And just reflecting on your point, Jeffrey, about, no referrals, I think we need to sort of be moving away from that culture of that you can only access things through your GP. There are most of these, resources that actually can be accessed directly by members of the public if only they knew about them, and if only they had the confidence to self-direct themselves to that. So we need to start to get to a point where we provide information, the right kind of information that counters the things that people might go to Google and look up, that actually gives you correct, valuable information that helps you to make decisions to look after yourself. So we're working very hard across the NHS to sort of develop that model. So some of you may have heard of the NHS 111 service, which currently you can only access through a phone line. But I think there are moves to actually make that a digital platform where you can look up things and be directed to your local services. And you can seek, and gain the help that you need directly without needing to make an appointment with a GP surgery. Locally at the surgery, you'll also be seeing in coming months practices developing websites that are actually very useful to patients, so that if you are worried about something, you can go on your practice website, you can look up your symptoms, and you can get, very careful guidance about which symptoms are actually worth worrying about and which ones you need to seek advice about and which ones you can go somewhere other than your GP surgery to seek help. So we've got pharmacists extending the roles that the kind of advice that they provide. If you have got a bad musculoskeletal problem, you can, I don't know whether most people are aware that you can actually book directly to see a physiotherapist. We've got mental health services that you can self-direct into if you need some advice around counseling or some kind of cognitive behavioral therapy to deal with sort of low-grade mental health problems. These make up a huge chunk of what general practice has to deal with. And if we can somehow support you to care for those things yourself, that gives the service more time to deal with what I referred to previously as an escalating kind of complex conditions. So we really have to, and we are working very hard to actually increase the public's confidence to support itself and support each other in dealing with a lot of conditions. If you do ring your surgery, you'll probably find that your phone call will be answered by trained receptionists who have had enhanced training around trying to guide you through the very complex healthcare system. So they might want to, with some more information from yourself, if you're willing to give them, be able to actually direct you somewhere else where you might be able to get help rather than waiting 3-4 weeks for a GP appointment or getting frustrated that you can't be seen on the day. We're also going to be working collaboratively because the complexities that I sort of referred to, the long-term conditions, the multiple conditions, the increasing age, the frailty, that's not something that one professional alone or one service alone can deal with. It needs a collaborative approach, and it needs an integrated approach. One of the things I didn't mention before that was wrong with the system, and you all know this, that when you go and ask patients, what they want to know with people with sort of multiple health conditions is that, they don't want to keep telling their stories repeatedly through the system. They want the system to be integrated and connected. And so we're going to be working very hard to actually develop that model. Already in St. Helens, we recognize that actually meeting this challenge that we face can't be done with each service just trying to sort of meet this challenge on its own. The People's Board and the local care system that my colleague Sarah is going to actually probably touch on in her presentation will probably paint a picture on how the system wants to work collectively to try and support the population better. Primary care also has to actually fit in with this emerging sort of collaborative work. And we're realizing that actually trying to deal with everything in individual units probably isn't sustainable. And just recently, general practice is now looking at actually forming itself into a federation. It's only in its actual infancy, but the idea is to actually give resilience to the system and to give patients an option or a wider range of options to deal with their multiple and complex conditions. This federation will obviously be linked in with other developing systems, possibly in future actually linked around localities, because it makes sense to actually start to look at developing care systems that actually have got populations in mind, and big enough populations to be able to deliver services efficiently. So, I turn to recruitment then. Sorry, Ian jumped in. So in addition to actually collaboratively working, there's still inherently a problem with the structure. We still need more health professionals coming into the system. So we're working very hard in trying to retain the doctors that we have. We're trying to recruit those that are completing the training. We're trying to attract back those that are on the verge of leaving or may have just left, to in the short term, provide the kind of medical expertise we need. And that will require us to really think very hard about what it is that people need, what it is that we need doctors to do and what it is that others can do, other healthcare professionals can do in actually providing a service for the patient. You may have also heard that in the short term, we're probably looking at, because the workforce crisis is so acute, trying to support the system with recruiting doctors from overseas. Now, that's something we're not going to do on our own in St. Helens. It's going to be a collaborative effort with our partners and other local regions around Cheshire and Merseyside. And the idea is actually that the government has gone out and sourced doctors who are appropriately trained and appropriately understand the way the healthcare systems works in England and the UK. And we will be wanting to tap into that program to hopefully recruit some urgently needed workforce locally. In addition to that, we will be looking at actually enhancing the primary care workforce, that actually when you go to your surgery or when you go into surgery, you don't necessarily just see a GP or a nurse. You might, in the very near future, be being seen by a clinical pharmacist. I've already mentioned direct access to physiotherapy. There are all kinds of thinking around even using paramedics to deliver care, particularly to the housebound. I'm getting indications that my time's up. So I'll just sort of sum up to say that we do face challenges, but they're not insurmountable. And working in partnership, particularly with the public, I'm sure we can actually provide a service that's sustainable now and for the future. Thank you.
Afternoon, everyone. I'll try and be very brief in terms of talking about the annual accounts for last year. That's me, Ian Stoddart, the Chief Finance Officer. Happy to answer any questions after. Top left-hand corner, the finance team will take you through any aspects of finance in relation to CCG. First slide is really about how we spend your money. It's your money that we vested to discharge on your behalf. This is about getting the best possible value from that money in terms of the services we commission. Unfortunately, last year, some of the economics and good housekeeping evaded us to a certain extent, certainly for part of the year at least. Second point is that I mentioned the future of the health service, and for current generation, next generations depends on it. There is a need to stabilise the finances and in turn ensure that we commission services in line with the needs of St Helens residents, and in turn that has got to be affordable. Not going to talk to you about some of the detail and the complexities of finance, but the general financial duties of the CCG, as you can see on the slide above, we need to make sure basically we spend within the resources allocated, and that's in terms of our revenue, day-to-day expenditure, how much we spend in terms of running the CCG itself, and how we actually manage the actual cash in the bank. Within that as well, we've got to make sure that we pay our suppliers on a prompt basis. The other considerations that the CCG has had to deal with last year and also into this year is that we are working within a formal financial recovery regime with NHS England. It's known as Legion. It's NHS's Legion, its legal directions due to this aspect of financial deficit. Our response and it's a whole system response, has been about an improvement plan, working more collectively with the CCG, with the local authority, and looking at the areas of improvement. And you can see in terms of the vision, this is about improving people's lives in St Helens and challenging those areas of cost and demand. So the financial approach is really just supporting the overarching improvement approach for St Helens. Now, going into delivery of our financial duties, there are 6 duties I need to tell you about in terms of the responsibilities under the NHS Act 2006. There are 6 duties. 2 of those we didn't achieve them. The first 2 are mentioned at the top in terms of achieving financial balance. So last year we had income of £319.8 million and we actually spent £328 million. So we overspent by £8.7 million. So we spent somebody else's money to the tune of £8.7 million. So we didn't achieve that duty. That in turn, from an audit position, whilst we had an overall unqualified audit opinion on financial statements, it did give rise to a qualified regulatory opinion because we didn't achieve that duty. That in turn then led us to a position where, whilst we were positive in terms of our achievement of value for money, the fact that we had that deficit and the fact that we've got a deficit moving into this financial year meant that we had issues in terms of value for money opinion from the auditors. So those were the 2 areas that we didn't achieve. The other elements in terms of achievement on the running costs, we had £4.2 million allocated for us in terms of running the CCG. We underspent by a sum of around £200,000. In terms of how much is that per head of population, that's just over £20.17 per head of population we spend on running the CCG. We did pay our invoices. We were asked to pay 95% of our invoices within 30 days. We absolutely met that target. We got to the 98% level, and we actually managed the cash in our bank. So it was a little bit of a game of 2 halves the last financial year, where we went quite significantly into deficit. We managed to recover some of that towards the end of last year. And you can see from that slide the areas of where our spending was last year. So broadly in St Helens we have 196,000 registered population. So for each person each year we get about £1,620 per person. The bulk of the expenditure, as you can see, was on the acute commission, the spending predominantly in the hospitals. A lot of those areas last year were overspent on some of the elective and also the trips to A&E and the admissions therefrom. You can see after that the biggest other areas of expenditure in prescribing from general practice. So looking ahead, we have set 2-year financial plans covering this current financial year and next. This current financial year we do not comply with the business requirements of NHS England. So for this current financial year we have a planned deficit of £5 million. So again, we're spending £5 million more than we've been allocated. That has been agreed by NHS England, but the stark issue around that is that we accumulated a deficit, and at the end of 2017-18, that could reach the £13.7 million mark if we deliver our current plans. So the question is, what are we doing about that? Well, we're continuing with the improvement plan. We're looking at the financial challenges that are resultant from some of the national and local health system challenges in our populations. So we have growing demand in some of the acute care. We have mental health care where some of the management of patients is out of area. We do have a significant increase in terms of complexity of patients, and you heard from Mike earlier about the patients with long-term conditions. So we do have a plan in terms of delivering to that £5 million deficit, and then the year after that, getting to a break-even point. But the road to financial recovery is longer than just the the initial 12 months, 18 months that it took to get us into this position. So with the leadership of the CCG and with all the partners, that is what we are looking at achieving moving forward. So any questions after, happy to go into those specifics, but I'd just like to hand over to you, Sir O'Brien, the Clinical Chief Executive.
Thanks, Ian. And big welcome everybody, and I'm really pleased to see so many people here, because actually I live in St Helens. I'm not from St Helens originally, I'm actually from Leeds, so quite a lot of competition growing up. My granddad was an avid rugby league fan, so I did actually watch Leeds and St Helens play at Wembley once. But I've lived in St Helens since, I think it's 2001 now. Both my children were born in the borough, and I've spent once I qualified to be a nurse, I've spent all my nursing career in St Helens. So I have a really, really big affinity and passion about the borough and want us to get this right. But this is the most people I've ever seen at one of our AGMs, so it's really, really brilliant to see so many people and to see you being interested, because at the end of the day, the CCG is spending your money, public money, on trying to get healthcare right for the local population. So, we should all be interested in this. What I'm going to do now in kind of 10 minutes is reflect on the year, and you've already had it alluded to. It was a very, very challenging year for the CCG. A year ago, just under a year ago, I was actually chief nurse at the CCG, not the chief executive. And what happened, on the left of the screen, I'm going to just summarise the challenges we faced, and on the right is my kind of summary of why I think we ended up where we ended up. But you've heard about the finances. We started the financial year last year with a 12 million saving target. That in itself was huge. But as well as a big 12 million saving target, we were also starting to run out of money across our budget. So this time last year, when I stepped up into this post, along with Mike Wyatt, who came in as recovery director, our financial challenge was actually 20.4 million. So even though you've just heard Ian and Mike think, well, that's terrible, they ended up with an 8 million deficit, actually it could have been 3 times worse than actually where we ended up. We were facing this time last year a 20.4 million challenge against our budgets. We were rated inadequate, so I'm sure some of you saw that in the press, and it's a bit like schools and everything. The health service gets rated as well, and there's a way of assessing CCGs, and unfortunately last year, around about July I think it was, we were rated as inadequate. Could have been worse, we could have been in special measures, we missed special measures, and around September last year, we were also then forced by NHS England to have an external review of the CCG, a capacity and capability review. So PricewaterhouseCoopers came in and assessed all of the staff working in the CCG and assessed the systems to see whether we were good enough to do the job that we had to do. So we had a formal review, and then around September last year, our previous chief executive resigned, and you can see we were forced into this situation with NHS England where every month those of us working there had to go to these very, very difficult meetings where we were held to task, rightly, because it is public money, and I think that's the big learning for all of us. This is public money. We were held to task in very, very difficult meetings for the money and what we were doing with it. I think we ended up in such a place, fundamentally because I think Dr. Jean-Ajay's alluded to this. We have St Helens. I've learned a lot since I've worked for the CCG, especially for the safeguarding work I do. We live in a borough where I live in Rainford, and I try to say to my children, we live in Rainford. In Rainford, people live 10 years longer than they live in town centre. In Rainford, my 2 children don't really want for anything. They do all sorts. They do 6 miles down the road. We have, a quarter of the children in the borough live in poverty. So we have a lot of challenges in the borough of St Helens, a lot of health needs, a population where there's a lot of inequality. So that's part of the reason why the money I think we're allocated at times isn't enough. I also think the public's expectations need to get a little bit more realistic about what we can and can't afford in the NHS. If we want to sustain the NHS. I'm very, very proud of the NHS, but if we want it to sustain, that it's free at the point of use, that we do provide the healthcare we also as the public, and that includes me, have to be realistic about our expectations. But I think in the CCG, we did have gaps. We didn't have all our posts filled. We did need to up our game, and we did need to bring in people who were capable of doing the job. We weren't very organised, we were quite disorganised, we didn't have any project management, so we needed to get more organised about making sure the things we were going to do, we kept on track. I think we were focusing a lot on a lot of the processes and not on actually what's the end game, what are we going to do by delivering this. I learned when I stepped up that I don't think our partnerships were as strong as they could be. The health service at the moment is very much trying to get the whole health service to work together in a much more collaborative way. And I think I've had to do a lot of relationship building around St Helens since I stepped up into this role. And I think we weren't doing enough talking to members of the public. I think today's engagement event has been brilliant for really trying to get the views of the population of St Helens. But actually, 200,000 population, even though this is a full room and it's great, there are so many more people out there that we need to speak to make sure we understand what the people of St Helens want and need. And I think we needed internally to do a bit more work with our staff. So, you know, hold my hands up. We were in a bad place because there's things we could have done better as a CCG. So then we were put into this formal position where we are still in what they call legal directions, which means so the CCG is a statutory organisation. We have a board, we're allocated a budget, and in many ways we're there to make decisions, but at the minute really important big decisions like appointment of chief exec, appointment of chair, everything has to be run by NHS England at the moment because we are in formal directions, and obviously we want to get out of that to have a bit more freedom to do what we need to do for St Helens. But how did we respond to that when we went into inadequate? Well, obviously, we appointed a recovery director, which is Mike Wyatt, who also works for the local authority, and that was about trying to bring our working with social care and with the authority much closer. I stepped up as chief exec. We brought some new people in. So Angela, that's organised this great event today, was a new recruit to the CCG who's been brilliant for us around governance and making sure we do things in the right way. We brought a new manager in to sort out project management and make sure we're more organised in the CCG. One of the other things we did was we made sure our senior staff, like myself and our executive team, have real ownership of the challenges ahead. And I'm confident now that every member of the team, every member of the CCG, every staff member really understands where we're at and what our goals are and what we need to do and has got a sight on the money and the fact that we've got to make that work. And we obviously had the monthly recovery meetings. What else did we do? We are working, we touched on this and the vision for the borough. St Helens, the challenges across all the public sector in St Helens, the money's a challenge in the police, the fire service, the local authority. But through the St Helens People's Board, we've all come together to say, how are we going to sustain the services in St Helens to a high quality together to make sure that we're meeting the needs of the population? And we really have got a vision, and it's been recognised both locally and nationally that we're doing something a little bit different in St Helens. So we have started to really improve the relationships, the integrated working. I'm confident internally now that it's not all perfect. I'm not saying that. I think we reflect all the time and change what we need, but we've got really robust systems internally and a really strong executive team and a really strong governing body who jointly together we're doing everything we can to make sure that we hit our financial challenge. And it's not because it's all about the money, but if we don't get the money right, we might have to make really difficult decisions about services, and we don't want to cut any services for our local population. So our challenge is to make that work. And obviously we're working really hard with the People's Board. Despite all the challenges and all the negativity around it, there's actually some really things I'm really proud of that the CCG do well. And I think it's really important at your annual meeting and in your annual accounts to reflect on, because it hasn't all been bad. So do you know what? We're rated good for dementia care in St Helens. We actually do, our services, the services we commission, the frontline staff, do some really good work around dementia care. We're rated good for diabetes care. People who know me will know for many, many years I was a diabetes nurse in the borough. It's a passion of mine. In addition to that, there was an opportunity to bring extra money around diabetes into St Helens, and we won the most money for Cheshire and Mersey. We're bringing £700,000 extra into the borough to spend on diabetes care, which is great. Our GPs, there's 34 GP practices in St Helens. They have to do a QOF framework, which is around the care they give to you. We always rate high in that. You know, our GPs deliver good care. And we know that across all our commissioned services, infection rates, so things like C. difficile, MRSA, our services that we commission do really well on those things, actually. You know, our local trust has just been rated really, really well around its cleanliness and its experiences. And last year we did a really, really big piece of work around our community services, and we recommissioned them, and we've got a new model now around community nursing that we're just embedding, and that's a real opportunity to bring acute and community and specialist services together. And we're also doing quite a lot of work around pressure ulcers, particularly across care homes and that. In addition, we've introduced a referral management system, which is about trying to manage the referrals into our hospitals. Ian shared that, you know, the care at the hospital is really, really expensive. So if you've got a minor injury and you think I'm going to go to A&E, it costs us a lot more money if you go to A&E rather than going to the walk-in centre. And it's really getting the population to understand that. So we've introduced systems to try and make sure people are going to the right place at the right time. We've done loads of work. We have a medicines management team who are pharmacists who work at the CCG, who are in our GP practices all the time and have really done a lot of work around making sure the medicine that you get prescribed is the right medicine, but also that it's cost effective. We have got inequality. I touched on inequality as a population. We sometimes have inequality across the care people get. We've done a lot of work to try and reduce that variation. And we're doing a thing around Falls Initiative. And the biggie for me is that we're absolutely committed to generally working through the People's Board and coming up with a new system for St Helens. Looking ahead, the challenges aren't going to go away. We've still got a massive financial challenge for next year. So we've got to get that right. Primary care is a massive challenge. You know, we can't recruit enough GPs. We need to sustain primary care. We've still got to work hard at all the things I've said we're doing well, like infection. And there's a lot of uncertainty in the whole system. We might have seen in the news about things like STP. So at a time when we want to get it right for St Helens, there's an expectation that we're also doing the right thing for the whole of Cheshire and Merseyside. So as officers working at the CCG, we have to balance what's right for our local population and doing what's expected of us across a bigger NHS. So I suppose to summarise for me, the main thing I want to say to you all is, yes, it's been a really, really challenging year. And what I would also say is that we don't always get it right. You know, when I was a jobbing nurse in St Helens, I didn't always have the best view of commissioners. How do they know what's best for people with diabetes and get it right? I work with people with diabetes all the time and I know better than them. But actually, having now worked at the CCG since 2014, hand on heart, I will say to you that every single one of my team across that organisation want to do the best thing for the people of St Helens. Yes, we have difficult decisions to make. Yes, we don't always get it right. But what I would say to you all is we are absolutely 100% committed to meeting these challenges and doing what's right for the whole population of St Helens. There will be things we have to do that you won't like as a member of the public, but I hope what you've understood from Ian's presentation and mine is that at the end of the day, it's public money and we're given a budget to manage. And if we want to sustain a health service that generally is free at the point of use and helps us to, you know, keep well and healthy as a whole population, then our job is to make those difficult decisions, but always at the centre of everything we decide are the people of St Helens. I think we're moving to questions now. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. For a number of written questions. The first one comes from Brian Finney, and it's very timely in turn to Mike's comments about GP recruitment. And it's please provide details, including time frame, of how the above proposes with the recruitment of international GPs and the Federation to change provision of primary care within St Helens for the benefits of the service users. So it's about recruitment and Federation, time frame, and how that will support itself. Mike, do you want to feel that?
I'll take federations to start with. Federations in St Helens is really in its infancy, as I alluded to. There is a growing realisation that as general practices, we probably need to actually get together and sort of start to look at collaborative working. We've only just actually got to the point where we've all agreed to be part of a borough-wide federation, and a board has been elected to oversee the running of that federation. In the short term, I think the Federation will be focusing on the challenges I sort of pointed to earlier, that we've got practices with partners retiring and not, you know, struggling to actually get people to step into their place. So there are practices where, you know, you started with 5 partners and they're down to 2. They're still getting doctors to come and work in those surgeries, but those doctors are choosing to work on a freelance basis rather than commit to a salaried or a partnership option. So the Federation will be working hard to be able to respond very quickly when a practice is in crisis. So in the short term, you're not necessarily going to actually see anything different at your local practice beyond the fact that they're linked into a bigger organisation that will be able to if needed, provide the resilience they require. But in the long term, we'll start to organise ourselves into units that are more aligned to what community services are doing, and perhaps localities that we're working within the pupils' board to establish. And so I think that's the kind of medium-term sort of aspiration. So in the short term, on the sort of front line, you wouldn't necessarily notice anything for the next 6 months to 12 months. With regards to recruitment, I said, sort of this is going to be something that is looked at with partners. So it's not just going to be at St Helens, we're probably going to be doing that across Cheshire and Merseyside. And I think the latest figure was that we're going to be putting a bid for about 100 across that patch. The reality is that bid is going in November, so it's going to be joined, sort of a joint bid with other CCGs across Cheshire and Merseyside. And this is a program that is recruiting adequately trained doctors, paying for their relocation and settlement in the respective areas, and then it will be up to us to sort of put our needs into that program to try and get doctors in much needed practices. So that's the time frame. Will be about November. The bid goes in, and then it's probably going to be another 6 months, 12 months before you actually see that taking effect locally.
Thanks, Mike. Part of the trick too is persuading our young people to train to be health professionals in the borough and then to stay in the borough, whether that's through becoming doctors or nurses. And we've had a question from Cowley, a student at Cowley. We were looking at recent issues in the NHS and would like to know what you think about the 7-day NHS and how it impacts services and available funding. Hilary. Dr. Hilary Flett is one of our governing body members and is a doctor in Mill Street Surgery in Duke Street.
It's a tricky one. I think we need to think very carefully about what we want from the NHS with regards to 7-day funding and 7-day access. Because if you are acutely ill and acutely unwell, then it's perfectly appropriate for people to access acute services. I think we need to think very carefully about what services we can access for 7 days. And as you've heard from the presentation, currently we don't have enough GPs to manage the 5 days a week that we're currently open, let alone the 7 days a week, that's on a Saturday and Sunday. However, the government want us to provide 7-day access within primary care. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to go out to consultation with our population and ask you, when do you want to see that additional workload? It may be that you want more access on a morning or an evening or a Saturday morning rather than Sunday afternoon, which is what originally people thought 7-day access might mean into primary care. So there's a piece of consultation to go out, but by the 1st of April next year, we will be having to provide within general practice an extra 50 hours a week access. We're working on it as to how to do it. With regards to, so what do I think the impact on the NHS is? Well, we've got to do it because it's nationally mandated to do it, and we'll try our very hardest to put the best thing in place for our patients. But we're going to have to ask you, when do you think that time is? And I say that piece of consultation is going out.
Thanks, Hilary. Great. Cowley are actually having a programme of nursing cadets, some of whom are here today actually, and linking. That's a really good programme which we're happy to help with. Another question they've asked is, we've noticed that there are students in the college who can't access quickly enough mental health support due to the cuts that have been made to services. Do you intend to provide more funding for these very important services in the future? Sarah.
I mean, it's a really good question. It's a really challenging question, actually. I think, if I'm being really honest, I think mental health provision at the moment across the borough isn't where it needs to be. It is one of our challenging areas. So I think the funding, you've seen the financial position, so I think that's a difficult decision over the next 12 months if we can put more funding. I do think there's probably opportunities within our existing services to make sure the services that we're offering are offering the right level of what people need. In addition to that, a lot of the stalls that are here today, I think what we've got to do is work harder and more closely with some of our voluntary sector and third sector providers, and I think that's another reality of the NHS, that not everything that people need is necessarily going to be provided by an NHS funded service. We have lots of, so like Geoffrey's point about the Alzheimer's Society, it could be that some of the needs will come from a body that isn't the NHS. So I haven't fully answered it. Probably right now more funding, given the financial position, isn't what we're going to be able to do, but we are at the moment doing a big piece of work around our children's mental health services and reviewing them and trying to look at whether the need's right. So what we might need to do is look at whether the services we're currently paying for are actually offering everything we need, and work with our current providers to see whether, so if there's gaps like that, how we address it. And what I would say to all of you is, because I didn't know that maybe was an issue, particularly around the college, so the more you engage with the CCG and tell us how it is for you and tell us your views on things, the more, when we're looking at our services, we can try and get it right.
Thanks, Sarah. Again from Cowley. Starting our course at Cowley, we found there are lots of resources available in St Helens that we were not aware of. Would you consider using funding more social media campaigns or information to ensure more young people are informed? Because social media is very much the way that younger people will communicate. Again, Sarah, do you want to?
Well, I mean, that's an absolute yes, isn't it? We need to do more of that. And I think, and again, I think it's interesting. Again, when I was working as a diabetes nurse, we wanted to set up, some of the young people said to me, we want a Facebook, we do Facebook. We wanted a Facebook page. And actually back then, it was a no from the trust because they're nervous. So I think the NHS needs to, it's getting better, like we have Twitter, but I think absolutely yes, we've got to do more around how we reach our young people. I'm working age, so again, I've lived in the borough a long time. I didn't know about some of the things that were available until I came to work in the CCG, because as a working parent, I don't necessarily read the Star or listen to local radio. So absolutely, we're going to do more of that. And to be fair, our teams are already trying to do more of that. But again, we might be out of touch with which bits of social media young people use these days. So again, if you can feed back to us the kind of social media platforms that would most appeal to young people, that would be really, really helpful for our engagement team to make sure that we're getting out there, in the right forums. And again, I would say, it's not just to Cowley, to any of the local schools and colleges, Geoffrey or I or any of the team are willing to come out and talk, meet young people, about careers in the health service and about what we offer in St Helens, so we're more than happy to do that. My summing up would probably pick up on something I said. The NHS is 70 years old next year, and despite all the bad press and despite all the challenges, do you know what? Healthcare has never, ever been so good. We are, the research that goes on, the offers that are offered to people with long-term conditions, people live now many, many years longer than they would have done even 10 years ago with their long-term conditions. So I'm really, really proud to be a nurse. I'm really proud to work for the NHS. But I want to protect it, and I want to protect services for St Helens. So we have a difficult job. I hope what's come across is that despite the challenges, what you have in the CCG is a really committed, really focused senior team and a whole host of staff who are working really, really hard in really difficult circumstances, day in and day out, to get it right for the people in St Helens. And along with our partners at the People's Board, I'm really, really confident we can actually integrate care and make the experience for people on the ground much, much better. But we do need your help as well. We need your help in terms of looking after your own health, right? Take care of yourselves, look at the services you're using, and we need your help to come and tell us what we're getting right and what we're getting wrong. I want to hear about what we don't get right. And my promise to you is we will do our best to fix it within the financial constraints that we've got. So big thank you again.